Hello and welcome to Chats, a television podcast, Season 14, The Chatzovers. On this season of Chats, we are covering the HBO drama, The Leftovers. My name is Alan, and I'm joined by the music producer for The Leftovers, who just seems to really love the Pixies. It's Magellan.
Okay, so in this scene, I'm thinking a character is, maybe like they're thinking...
Okay.
But they're not quite sure where they're thinking. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
they're not quite sure
that.
if they're in the right frame of mind.
Uh-huh. Okay. Yeah, I love that. It's kind of a big thing we're going for in season 2 is like people not knowing where their mind is and like mental health and all that stuff's all there.
Wait, say that last part again.
Like they don't know where their mind is?
Cut to the episode playing. I'm trying to think of another song that would be funny, but I can't think of any other song because that one's stuck in my head. Where's my mind?
I can't find my mind. It's Can't Get You Out of My Head by Kylie Minogue.
There, good.
Can you imagine? Just replace everywhere that they used Where's My Mind with Can't Get You Out of My Mind by Kylie Minogue. How better the show would be.
I'd love if we replace it with Fat Bottom Girls in every instance. And we had like a slow orchestral.
Yeah, take me. Oh, like a similar to the Grease song.
Oh my God.
Leftovers is the gift that keeps on giving. Truly.
They're really making this is like newsroom level choices with the music.
Except that they just hit repeat on the same song a lot also. That's the only difference. But otherwise, this is Sorkin's ballpark.
Yeah,
and it's our ballpark, folks.
Someone at HBO in the mid-10s was greenlighting this set of music across both shows.
Right. And this is our ballpark, folks, because we are talking about the HBO drama The Leftovers. Swing! I'm excited to talk about it, folks. We're talking about an incredible pair of episodes this week. Magellan, how are you?
I'm doing swell. How are you?
I'm doing swell. I love swell.
Thank you.
I'm
Me too.
Ducky. I had a coworker who used to always say like, I'm Ducky. And I always thought that was cute.
Ducky, quack, quack.
Yeah, Ducky, quack, quack.
Ducky, go, quack, quack.
Not yesterday. The last time I was at the beach with my family, my sister was that girl from the
Ducky,
Vine.
huh?
Because there was a goose on the beach, and my sister was like, ducks! Ducks and geese, to be fair, not to tease my sister, are like kind of similar looking.
There was a whole children's story about it.
Exactly. This guy gets it.
Yeah.
And
actually, that was a swan. Sorry. No geese involved.
Start the episode over. Hey, everybody, welcome. Start the whole podcast over.
Sorry. Waterfowl, party foul.
No harm, no foul. This week on the Chatzovers, we watched It Fouled, F-O-W-L, This week on the Chatzovers.
All's foul in this podcast. Go ahead.
All's foul in love and honk. This week we watched Season 2, Episode 7 of The Leftovers, A Most Powerful Adversary, as well as one of the most highly acclaimed episodes of the series, Season 2, Episode 8, International Assassin. A Most Powerful Adversary was written by Damon Lindelof and Patrick Somerville, who owes me for all of the tears I shed last night because I finished Station 11 last night and it was one of the greatest TV finales of all goddamn time. I cried so much. Patrick, come here, Patrick. Anyways, it was directed by Mimi Leader and it aired November 15th, 2015. Magellan, can you tell me what happened in A Most Powerful Adversary?
In this episode, Nora gives Kevin and Jill news they weren't expecting. Lori makes a rash decision that affects the Garveys. Kevin deals with the fallout of Nora's news.
Nora's news is that she's leaving?
Yes.
That's dumb. Okay,
yeah.
They intentionally bury the lead in the HBO summaries, and I appreciate that, but like...
That one was like 6 feet deep, yeah.
Yeah. I wrote in my notes, Nora dipped like these chicken fingers I'm eating, because I had chicken fingers for dinner tonight.
Were you dipping them?
Yeah, in sriracha mayo that I made.
Ooh!
Yeah.
Ooh, I'm more of a honey mustard with the chicken fingers, but sriracha mayo is not bad.
I absolutely thought about making honey mustard, and I went, Mom, do you think if I combine honey and mustard,
I don't know.
I don't think
how that
works that way. No, it can't be. There has to be other things. I'm Googling honey mustard recipe.
How do you make homemade
Dijon mustard, honey, mayonnaise, lemon juice, cayenne pepper? Oh, it's basically, well, it's Dijon, and I have Dijon. I'll be right back, guys. I'm really sorry. We got to start.
Honey, mustard, mayonnaise, vinegar, and a couple spices. Wow. It's honey and mustard.
Amazing. But it's, okay. I could do this. Regular mustard and Dijon. Okay, great. Tell me what happened in... Oh, you already did.
in order to make that honey mustard, you have to go to the grocery store and willfully avoid honey mustard.
You have to tactically...
Because you're like, okay, here's the mustard. Now I need to dodge the honey mustard to get the mayonnaise
Matrix
in
dodging.
the honey. It's like, just buy honey mustard.
You're in slow-mo. No, I don't want the additives. I want to make my own.
Yeah. What do you think of a most powerful adversary?
Who's the adversary? Oh, it's Patti.
Patti. I mean, let's really get to the themes of this.
Okay, so Patti is the name of Doug's crush in the TV show Doug. Her last name is mayonnaise. Mayonnaise is an ingredient in honey mustard. Got it. Got the themes. Podcast over.
Crushed it.
These are like the densest episodes of TV we've ever watched, and yet we are beating around the bush here.
I mean, you just did, like... The honey mustard thing was our version of like the prehistoric intro to episode 1. Yeah. And you just did what this episode does, where characters reference it out of nowhere. And you're like, wait, you're not supposed to know about that scene.
See that.
You can't say our cave is caving in or whatever. You're not allowed to do that. That was like a thematic overture, not something that is an idiom. Anyway, I don't know why that annoyed me.
I had a lot of thoughts about that kind of thing in International Assassin, because that line's in International Assassin.
Yeah.
I think they referenced the cave in this as well, or something caving in. I want somebody to stare at the camera and just say, like, I don't know, you just got to let the mystery be. And then, like, quiet. So, to just get into this, we are really rapidly approaching the point where I stopped watching The Leftovers, which is the end of season 2. And so, like, my memories are getting a...
Did you stop because you didn't... Oh, no, there was the big gap between seasons 2 and 3.
Yeah, well, it's 2 years. So this ends in 2015, and then it's 2017. So that was a really busy time in my life. And we'll talk about this when we get to season 3. But season 3 also airs like the month before Twin Peaks: The Return, which when you watch International Assassin, you learned that maybe Damon Lindelof and company really like Twin Peaks. Oh.
Yeah, maybe Twin Peaks really likes whatever that is.
Contemporary TV. Yeah. But it's all influencing each other. A most powerful adversary, though, is the beginning of where I'm like, this is where The Leftovers was when I stopped watching it. Was like, Patti's an issue, and how's Kevin gonna stop it, and is he a Christ-like figure? Like, we're just cresting the ridge of all that stuff now, and I think that this is still a solid episode that answers some questions and is like interesting in all the right ways, but also it's getting into some stuff that I don't really like. Personally.
Yes, definitely.
What about Hugh?
Yeah, I think, I did some reading on the Leftovers wiki for International Assassin specifically, because I was just curious about, like, it's such a different episode, and we'll get to it. I was curious about how it's talked about or trivia about it, stuff like that. And, Damon Lindelof talks about that episode as, thinking that its events are somewhere between having a medical or a psychological explanation and being fantastical. And he's sort of like, hey, if 2% of the world's population disappeared, then we can make the events of the show at least 2% mystical or magical, like textually. And I think we get into tricky territory. Like this episode has to sort of bear the weight of that sloppy framing in order to set the stage for International Assassin, which is like a pretty interesting tone piece, I think. Yeah. And like characterful in ways that I wasn't anticipating. But it like this episode is trying to have it both ways, where it's presenting like really credible psychological explanations for what's going on with Kevin, and also seemingly in the world credible like magical explanations for what's going on. And as you like add explanation and evidence to both of those, it doesn't make things more ambiguous. It just makes things more dissonant, I think. And I think I enjoyed the experience of watching this episode, but my major critique is that you can't have Lori say like, all right, Kevin, you should probably take medication because you have psychosis. and then he goes and does like the magical death thing. Like we can't do that. It's harmful in TV for characters to say like, take your medicine, and then for characters to be like, all right, anyway, fuck that. I have this like magical solution. I don't know. So
I think that Kevin is terrible to Laurie in this episode.
Yeah, definitely. In a way that I think is in character, and hopefully we unpack a little bit in episode 9.
Yeah.
But it's tough because you don't want the show to also be terrible to Laurie and Laurie's perspective. And it kind of is. And we're like not getting her interiority enough in this one, I think.
Tying back to that 2% magic thing, though, I think this episode still feels like 2% magic, and then we twist that. Somebody fell on the slider, and it dipped into like 75% magic. And like for Kevin to be right, and for Virgil and all this stuff to be building towards a thing that is really happening in the next episode, that makes this episode feel like oh, the real world doesn't even matter. All we do that matters in the leftovers happens in our spiritual minds, which is like. Yeah. It gets in the way of what is actually some really interesting metaphor work that they're doing with Kevin and Patti and his worries about Patti that, like, I'm sure somebody working on the show realized things like, I texted you this line when Kevin is saying, Patti keeps telling me, I don't want to keep listening to the voice in my head. The voice in my head keeps telling me to kill myself because that's what Patti's telling him to do is like, in the context of the show, she's saying, if you do that, that's how you get rid of me and you fight me and that's how you become free. However, that's also like, to talk about mental health here for a sec, like that is a legit anxiety of people who are like that's what suicidal ideation is that there's a thought in your head that says that things will be easier or clearer or better if you do this. And like that's really heavy. And then for him to be like, yep, sounds good, I will do it. And for that to like lead to a magical mystery journey, I just think we should at the very least up top be saying like, I'm not in any ways like in favor of that, and I think that the show kind of fumbles it surprisingly a lot, and it comes back to like you saying in season 1 that whenever the show gets weird or mystical, it feels distancing, whereas when it becomes deeply human and like grounded in our reality, it's like the best show ever. I mean, hell, like this episode starting with Jill and Michael and like the whole cursing in church scene and all of that stuff, and then like Kevin's adventure to get a handcuff taken off of him. All that stuff is interesting. That's like, not like relatable, but it's human. These are human elements. And for it, that's why the back end of this just kind of like started to rub me the wrong way.
Yeah, I think it just gets at the heart of like why I've never been a huge fan of like the mystery around Kevin, which is that like if you play it up as a mystery and say like, oh, there could be a magical explanation, you have to like negate the sort of real world psychological stuff in order to have the magical thing be a thing. And I'm like not interested in that. I think I like that the show has this unknowable, potentially magical or otherworldly or whatever event that is the inception of it, which is the sudden departure. And like, obviously something happened there that we don't have an explanation for, and now we have to deal with it. And I kind of like The Leftovers being a show where like everything else is real. Everything else is like just totally normal, It's just this one event that is completely inexplicable. And I do think you can still find a reading of the Kevin stuff across these 2 episodes, grounded in what Laurie says, where it's like a diagnosable psychiatric condition that he's experiencing. But then there's like enough to negate that I'm just kind of annoyed by it. I don't know. So, yeah.
I don't mean to say that I wish the entire show was realistic. Again, to keep looping back to it, Station 11 is that. It's like full of metaphor and poetry, but at the end of the day, there is nothing magical happening beyond like the possibility of a plague that kills 99% of people that are infected by it. That's like the starting inciting event of that show that leads to a story that is deeply realistic and deeply human. Whereas The Leftovers, because it dips into this stuff, is working in the realm of metaphor. Like, it's not just, oh, supernatural stuff is dumb because it's not real. Like, that's not what we're saying here. I am a huge Lost fan, and Lost deals in the metaphor as magic, and that's what magical realism is, all the time, for 6 whole seasons of that, to various effect. And I just think of this episode as like a crossing over point. Feels like it tiptoes too far into one. It just gets kind of silly.
Yeah, because it would be one thing if from the beginning they're like, hey, this is Patty's ghost or spirit or whatever that Kevin is communing with, and there's no ambiguity to it, and we just said that. That would be one thing, because then that is a metaphor for all the things that Patty's spirit is a metaphor for that we examine in the next episode. The ways that Kevin agrees with her, the like secret doubts he has about his own life, his own insecurities or worries or trauma, like those things I think are rich, and it's a useful metaphor. Or like Patti isn't real and Kevin is manifesting her because of his trauma, and that's interesting. And I just think the ambiguity between those two things as like it works narratively as like a thing to hook you, because it's a question and it's a mystery, and those are things that like intrigue people, make you want to watch more. But like, what's the function of that mystery? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's where I kind of, it gets tough when you have to start to like resolve the mystery, and then it's like, ugh, I don't like it. The mystery only really works when it's still a mystery, I guess, is kind of what I'm saying.
Absolutely.
And it starts to get a little less mysterious in these 2 episodes, which I think is to its detriment.
What are some big scenes from A Most Powerful Adversary that you wanted to touch on?
I think let's start with Jill and Michael in the church, and just kind of, square away what's up with the other characters in this one before we get Kevin where he's going for the next episode.
You can't say the F word in church.
Yeah. I really like Jill saying, fuck, 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 and Michael like, no, stop it.
My favorite part of that scene has to be when she's like, why you don't want to see, you want to like do everything but sex with me. And then he's like, he just kind of idly says afterwards, like, that's not the reason that I don't want to do it.
Yeah, she's like, oh, Jesus or God or whatever, is he the one who's telling you that we can fool around but we can't fuck? So she's like, fuck in church again. And then he says that he doesn't know if he loves her yet. And she's like, okay, well, bye.
Yeah. It's not God that say he's not the reason that I don't want to do this. I just want to have an intimate connection with my first person that I do that with. So
yeah.
Jill is like not able to square this. She's coming from Mapleton, where you're like, you spin the wheel and it says choke, and you're like, okay, this is normalized for me.
Right.
But it characterizes Michael well.
Yeah, what did you think of the Jill and Michael stuff as a noted fan?
I think that Michael being like, no, you need to chill. I like you as a person, and I like being with you, but I don't know how to reconcile my feelings with you, is good. I come out of this liking Michael a lot. Yeah. I find myself like connecting to him and his situation with his faith. I think this is a lot better than the alternative, which would be like, oh, I give up everything I believe in for you, or oh, I'm chaste and I'm going to become a priest. And it's like, he doesn't like go too far in either direction, like the supernatural stuff does eventually. But like he's just like, yeah, I'm still a person. I still like you. I know what sex is. It's not like he's an innocent child, and I really like that about him. He's a person who's seen a lot, and as we learn later from whatever he does or doesn't understand about his family, they have a pretty familiar understanding with like the trauma that can come from sexual relations also. So I think he's that looped around, and I was like, oh, it makes a little bit more sense actually that Michael is like very sensitive about this.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I did actually come around liking that aspect of this, and I too understand Jill being like, why does this matter to you? Like, it's just sex. It's just I thought that's what we were building towards. That was our plot arc, Michael.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, that's a different story arc for another season.
Right.
Did you like it?
Yeah, I think Michael gets more complex in this episode. I think we're sort of I wanted to spend a little more time with Jill. Like, we're kind of dialing the clock back on Jill a bit, which makes sense because her circumstances are becoming unstable and she's having a second mother figure leaving, which is incredibly destabilizing for her. But the episode doesn't really seem interested in like having Jill process that. She's just sort of like, I'm mad at you, Michael. I'm mad at you, Dad. Okay, bye. And that was kind of a bummer. But I do think it's great, the greater depth and complexity that Michael has in this one, and the more active role that he takes in like the central plot of the season.
I want to see Michael way more. I want to see Michael now come back into the Virgil plot line and like address all of that. And I'm super curious how they progress all of it.
Yeah. Should we talk about Nora?
Yeah, I think in terms of like going from side characters and escalating up to the big stuff, Nora would come up next. Nora's barely in this episode.
Yeah.
She's seen on the other side of a phone call with Kevin only. And he spends most of the episode looking for Nora because he wakes up with the cuffs still tying him, connecting him to the bed. He misses the sign that says key under pillow. Deeply, deeply funny that he spends maybe 30, 45 minutes of this episode being like, I'm never going to get this thing off my hand. Like, nobody's going to do it. Because it's police issued handcuffs, so they can't like take it off because they think that he might be actually a convict. And then he calls her and he's like questioning her about all this other stuff. Like, why did you leave? And like, I'm going to be okay. And also, why did you tie me to the bed? And she's like, I left a sign. And he goes, oh, Jill was like, she was standing in front of it. I missed it.
Well, Patti was blocking it.
Even better. And I think that there is, something about like this stress in your head, this like the Patti in your mind.
Yeah, Kevin's like self-sabotaging impulse is like what Patti represents here, I think.
There's again the Patti metaphor of it all. Is sometimes you miss the forest for the trees because you're worried so much about everything else. I wonder what's gonna happen with Nora now. I don't know what her situation. I was honestly surprised she left, dude.
Me too. Yeah. I don't know how I felt about that because it feels like a plot on some level it makes characterful sense because in the previous episode we had this really upsetting conversation between Nora and Erica. Kevin makes this admission about seeing Patti. We have all this information about how Erica was planning to leave. Nora's clearly a mirror to Erica. So, like, all the things are there that you could use to justify Nora leaving, but she just seemed so, I don't know, like, unfazed by every other thing that Kevin had said or done, that it was a little surprising to me that, like, this was the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak. It like almost felt like that's what needed to happen for the sake of doing the Kevin plot that we go into this episode into the next one. But maybe there's more going on there. I don't know.
I think so. I think between Nora and Lori, we're going to get more of like the women in Kevin's life and why they are the way they are. But for now, I was just like, oh, Nora just left. Like, their whole relationship was founded on, like, you tell me everything. So I understand her being like, well, you didn't tell me the biggest thing. But, like, I don't know. That seems really just callous to me to be like, oh, you didn't tell me that you have voices in your head because you knew I would leave you. I'm leaving you. Like,
right.
You'd think that she would want to work with him on that. And I think that it also serves, in a writing perspective, to ingratiate us back to Lori a little bit and be like, oh, at least she listens. They have their little hotel or motel therapy session, right? Which is something that Nora didn't seem willing to give to Kevin or to have with Kevin.
And we're not saying that Nora has any obligation to do any of those things. Like, her boyfriend is hearing voices and sleepwalking, and it's like kind of scary. So, we can understand why she would want to leave. It just seems like somewhat out of character given her most immediate actions, like in the immediate past in their relationship. So I don't know. I'm curious to see Nora verbalize those things. She just seems a little scared. But they have that conversation on the phone later in the episode where Kevin says, like, would you believe me if I told you? He says, I just need to know that when I do it, when I get rid of Patti, that you'd believe me that she's gone. He says, would you believe me? She says, I would believe you. And would you come back? I'd like that, she says. So she still cares about him. It's just like, this is a scary situation.
It is a scary situation. And yeah, I don't mean to sound too unfair to Nora. Like, I don't think it's in any way unconscionable to make that choice. It's just like, because we're following Kevin's perspective, it's like the women in his life kind of take to the periphery in ways that sometimes feel less natural.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I think that's a major... I think that's another criticism that I have of this episode is just like, it feels a little limiting to be in the Kevin perspective, or just not as interesting, because we just had this amazing episode, best episode of the show, where we were in Nora and Erica's perspective. So good. And, now there are all these characters orbiting around Kevin, Jill, Lori, Nora, where it's like, I just want to sit with them and like see how they're doing. Like, I know how Kevin's doing. And then we get Kevin, and we get Kevin centered episodes for 2 in a row, which is, not exactly what I come to the leftovers for. But I do think the next episode is a freaking great Kevin episode.
Stellar.
I'll say that.
Yeah, we just spent like 20 minutes being like, there's too much supernatural stuff, and we're gonna gush for 45 minutes straight about the most supernatural episode ever. So,
right.
Both of these things can be true.
That's the chat's way, right?
Exactly. This guy gets it.
This is so stupid. I love it so much. That's us.
Feed this to me. I hate it. Keep doing it though. Do way more of it.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Lori real quickly. Lori reappears after the phone call. Now she has traveled all the way from Mapleton to Texas, because Tom isn't here and she's worried about him. The moment when she talks to Kevin, and then the song starts playing again, I wrote in my notes, is the Garvey family theme now? Is that
right.
like whenever we interact with each other and Kevin's involved, it has to be Where Is My Mind? Like, come on.
Yeah.
It's getting.
It has to be either that or the Leftovers theme, right?
Yes, exactly.
One of those two.
And he's like pelts her with questions. Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
He's pelting her with questions like, okay, what happened? Why are you here? What did you do? What's gone wrong that you're here? And then, like, in a recent episode, I was talking about how when Tom asks, he's like, Jill, aren't you okay? And she's like, yeah, I'm okay. And I was saying, like, oh, there's no way she is. Nobody, like, says it like that. I love this moment when Lori is like, Kevin, are you okay? And his voice rises up in pitch a little bit. And he's like,
I'm fine.
Yeah, I'm fine. Yeah, I'm all right. It's like, you're not.
He's like beating the fence and screaming at her. I'm fine.
Yeah, exactly. That's definitely the sound of someone who's fine.
Kevin, I can hear Where Is My Mind playing in the background. You're not fine.
No, I'm
it's
fine.
Blasting from your iPod right now.
The Pixies are here. They're on set playing it live. She leaves because he's a dick to her, and then he goes, you don't leave. As if, like, narratively, she shouldn't be leaving.
Yeah.
Which loops back to them, I guess, going to the motel, or she tells him, like, if you actually want to talk. This is why I was like, he treats Lori terribly. She is like, hey, if you want to talk and figure this out, I'm going to be at the place. If you find Tom, can you tell him to meet me there?
Yeah.
And then he goes because he has no one else left to be with him.
Yeah.
And they have a bit of a conversation, a bit of a chat, if you will.
Yeah. So there's kind of two things. There's like the Lori and Tom stuff that she talks about, and there's her take on Kevin's stuff. I kind of want to talk about what Lori says about her and Tom first, because she gets into this really interesting monologue where she talks about belief and like someone's openness to believing in things, and she talks about how she and Tom have been taking advantage of that with the people that they're trying to get out of the guilty remnant by giving them this kind of placeholder thing to believe in, which is that Tom is the new Holy Wayne and has Holy Wayne powers. And she and Tom had a conflict over that. I was wondering how you felt about all of this stuff happening off screen, and just about like how this was kind of revealed to us in this conversation.
It's really quick because she's just like, yeah, Tom is a holy Wayne, and we did that, and we're nice to people instead of Wayne, who like, you know, was creepy about it. We're like the good holy Wayne, and it's like, wow, that's actually really important and big, and like loops back on the holy Wayne plot from season 1. Did any of that even matter? No. Okay.
Yeah.
So I just think that with them not showing it is telling us that this doesn't matter that much. But I wish it did, because it feels important to these characters.
Yeah, it's a great monologue with the belief stuff, and I think who plays Laurie? What's her name?
Amy Brenneman.
I think Amy Brenneman. I mean, we've known this. Amy Brenneman is incredible, and her being able to speak is probably the second best thing that's happened to this show after Ann Dowd being able to speak, I think.
Yes. Yep. Infinite speaking power.
Yeah. But, you know, I think what's interesting to me about this moment is that it sort of demonstrates the drawback of, because you said, I think in the last season, that the writers of the show were thinking about Two Boats and a Helicopter and Guest, was that the Nora episode? And how they had done these experiments in the first season with like zoomed in single character stories. And they were like, we want to do way more of that in season 2. And they have. And I think some of those have been really successful. But you have to imagine like an alternate universe version of The Leftovers where it's more of like a traditional prestige TV setup or like a, you know, a Game of Thrones thing or something where every episode we're scattered to the four winds and we have all these characters that we're checking in on. It would have been nice, I think, to see Tom and Laurie, and maybe we'll get a flashback to their stuff. I don't know, but it's sort of like, yep, that is thematically rich. I wish I had seen it instead of being told about it, because those are some good themes you got there.
I am concerned, based on even just the thumbnails for next week, that like they're gonna botch this Tom plot in a really significant way.
It feels that way, yeah.
I don't remember. It's 2 episodes left of my memory, and I don't recall how they do it. But I know that the Guilty Remnant stuff is going to crop up again in the present timeline, and not just as a political faction.
There's all like the Meg stuff. What's up with that? Which I'm not looking forward to getting an answer on.
No.
But yeah.
But I agree. I think that this Laurie conversation is the best scene in this episode.
I agree with that, yeah.
Because the rest of it is like Virgil, Kevin stuff, and Patti stuff, which like, hey, that part... Okay, my like I couldn't breathe for a minute from laughing so hard.
Should we? I think we should finish. Do you want to finish out this Laurie conversation with what she says to Kevin?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I also want to talk about the thing you were about to talk about.
Yeah. Okay. So where does the Laurie conversation end up?
Because you were saying that Kevin's horrible to Laurie in this conversation, and I think the way that he is, it's a combination of like him like really aggressively leaning on her and demanding things of her. And she basically says, like, look, this is not great therapeutic practice. I'm not supposed to tell you that you're having, like, a psychotic break, but, like, that's what's happening to you right now. The voices, Patty's not real. All the stuff that she said about Neil, I told you that stuff. It's your brain, like, using that information to create a persona for you to talk to. And you need to, like, take medication and all that stuff, which is a pretty coherent and I think convincing encapsulation of like that interpretation of this season of The Leftovers, right? From Laurie. And then Kevin basically, he says, you said I need help, so help. Says that to get her to come home with him, essentially so that she can be there for Jill so he can go off and kill himself. Right? Like, he doesn't really intend to follow Laurie's advice. It doesn't seem like it. It seems like he's manipulating her. Maybe it's like more nuanced or ambiguous, or he's not sure of his motives. And the Nora call shifts him in that direction. But he uses Laurie to an extent here to make himself feel secure enough to go and drink the poison and do the end of the episode stuff, which felt really shitty.
This is the Kevin that beats up the laundromat employee in season 1.
Right.
We've returned to that, like, it's my problem and other people are the casualties of it. because he stops listening to her after a certain point and is like, what, did you change your last name? And he's not listening to her answer. And then he's like, did you change it? She's like, no. He's like, all right, well, you're going to live with me, right? And she's like, well, no, I was going to go back and find Tom. We have a whole thing going on over here on our side of the family. And then he says the line, when you're with me, Patti isn't here, or come with me. I won't see Patti if I see you.
Yeah.
Which is like going right back to how this does work as a metaphor, that feeling of like manipulating your partner to stay with you because that's how they keep you from like considering
from
suicide.
Yourself, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Or considering self-harm, exactly. And that's like the way that people get trapped in a relationship. That's one of the primary like abusive ways that happens.
Yeah.
And again, he doesn't like face repercussions for this really in the episode. It doesn't work out, obviously, but like Laurie doesn't come with him.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, essentially, the plot confirms that he made the right choice. You know what I mean?
That's the thing. Yeah,
feels not good. I don't know.
Also, she says, you're hallucinating. Those people aren't real. And I feel like maybe this is too broad for their leftovers to handle. But like, in a world where 2% of the population disappeared mysteriously, why do you still say things like XYZ is not real? Like, how do we still define that? Because, like, now, can't anything be real? Didn't we, like, break reality, actually? So, why do we still have this, like, very narrow-minded version of psychiatry that's, like, you are hallucinating people that don't exist, therefore, they're not real? I don't know. I mean, you're seeing the 2%.
I mean, I think you're seeing a Laurie who has, like, swerved in the other direction post being indoctrinated into the guilty remnant, right? Where she was like very willing to believe in the sort of otherworldliness or inexplicability of things. And then she has very sharply returned to a worldview mediated through her education as a therapist, like her psychiatric background.
Yeah.
And either she's right or she's like overcorrecting by relying on those explanations. But I do think that's like that's from Laurie's character, you know, and that makes sense to me in that regard.
That's a very good point. It's in character for both of them to not handle this super well. Because post off-ramp, especially, Laurie is like extra jaded, you know?
Yeah. And she loves smoking now, too.
Loves it.
So good. Where'd you hide those cigarettes? Oh, I love this stuff. I like that conversation.
That Nicorette gum didn't work, apparently.
No, it did not.
He also apologizes for something that he did in the Garveys Know Best, where he like gets mad at her for the dog, which felt like a really interesting like version of like marriage reconciliation.
Yeah.
Where you're like, oh, I'm sorry for that thing that seemed really small, and now we know is really small, but it also mattered because I wasn't listening to you. Also, I'm still not listening to you.
Right. Yeah, it's funny because like it's telling that Kevin has thought about that so much and carried that with him and understood that in some way he was callous and he was, you know, we'll talk I think a lot in the next episode about Kevin's impulses to undermine his family, because that's sort of like I think key theme of his struggle in the next one. Mm-hmm. And so it's interesting to see him reckoning with that, but still not knowing the context of the dog thing and not knowing what Laurie hasn't told him. Because to Laurie, it's like the dog thing. Something way more traumatic happened to me that you don't even know about at the same time. But the dog thing was like a proxy for me. So it's interesting to see them have a moment that feels reconciliatory, but like isn't fully because there are still things that are being concealed.
I'm so happy we're talking about this, man. Watching the this is making me happy. Like watching season 2 as it was coming out, I forgot so much of season 1 that I would have never connected that apology and what it meant. And so now, like, I just am happy of the format that we're doing this because it's really like the show was in some ways meant to be like consumed as a whole and not in these like little chunks. So that's a fantastic connection that she was worried about something else and the dog was the proxy.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the only other thing with Lori and Jill is Jill comes home and she's like, what is she doing here?
Oh,
Lori
God.
has this moment where she looks at like their new family photo and that kind of makes her happy. And I want to see the Lori and Jill fallout in episode 9. I think
time.
That'll be interesting.
Absolutely.
But otherwise, I think it's the Virgil stuff to get us into and the Patti stuff to get us into the next episode.
I mentioned I was eating dinner while watching this first episode. I did spit out my food knowing about the cum cup. Sorry.
Oh my God. What an incredible speech.
More of a chalice, actually. I died. That's the funniest thing Patty's ever said. She basically, I mean, we can try to like get the clip in here, but also Patti is like, you know, Kevin, if you want me to, he's like, I want to get rid of you. Can I just finally get rid of you, please? She's like, yeah, so you have to go to Egypt. And like she basically tells him, it's like the plot of Moon Knight. It's like,
so
you gotta
good.
go. And then
You've got to
drink
fill it with your cum. Drink it to the last drop, Kevin.
And then Kevin, and then she giggles and she's like, I don't know, dude.
Yeah. It's a fucking joke. Oh my God, that was so good. It was funny because I was playing this episode on my TV and Charlie's in the kitchen, doors open. And it goes from the scene where Jill's like, fuck, 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 fuck. And Charlie's like, what show is this? And I'm like, it's The Leftovers. It's usually way better written. And he's like, yeah, it didn't sound like The Leftovers. And then the next scene, she's like, you got to go to Egypt, get the chalice. And he's like, yeah, yep, sounds like The Leftovers. And it's like, no, you don't understand.
Come back. It's
She's
a joke.
joking. She's doing a bit. But yeah, really funny scene.
I liked Michael jumping into his car, by the way, and being like, you're still seeing Patti. Here's my bike. We're going to go visit my uncle or my grandfather. Totally normal. People are just like, yeah, Kevin's weird. We can be weird to Kevin now. He doesn't get to fight back. Virgil manages to be a really regressive trope, and also they know that, and it feels really weird.
Yeah, they try to lampshade it because Patti says later, oh, you're going to go to like this older black guy on the outskirts of the town. That's borderline racist is what that is. Mm-hmm. And it's like, guys, you can't
just
do it
that
and say we're doing something racist and then it's not racist. Like, doesn't work like that.
He's literally the magical Negro trope. It's like, you come to my place and I do a ritual and I have lights all over my house because it's like a holy light, and they don't trust me because I'm like a weird old man that lives out in the woods. And then Patty's like, wow, you really trusted a weird old black man in the woods? That's racist. And it's like, Doc, no, you can't do that. I hit you on the head with a newspaper for that.
Yeah.
But we also learned some really serious and dark stuff about, and kind of in a subtle way, about Virgil and why he's been isolated like this, why Erica doesn't want to talk to him, why John doesn't talk to him. The implication is not made explicit, and it's that Virgil is a pedophile.
Here's what we... Yeah, sorry, say that again without me interrupting you. Sorry.
The implication is that Virgil is a pedophile, and he has at some point in John's childhood raped his either son or his grandson as well.
Yeah. So what the text in the show that we receive that we can use to piece this together is Virgil wants to help Kevin to face his adversary. This is the title of the episode, comes from what Virgil says to Kevin, a most powerful adversary, where he basically says, like, you need to die to cross over into some sort of unlife purgatory space to fight and vanquish your adversary. Kevin asks, who are you? Virgil says, I'm just someone who once had an adversary of his own, one that made me do terrible things. And then in the conversation, Kevin figures out that it was John who shot Virgil and killed him, presumably, in the moment that Virgil went to fight his adversary. And Kevin says, what did you do to him? And Virgil says that he hurt him a long time ago. And he also says that John shot him in the chest and in that foul machinery below the waist, is what he says. Mm-hmm. And then later in the episode, Patti calls him a pedophile. So she sort of voices like what those pieces are meant to imply. Like,
he harmed John, John harmed him in return.
Yes. And that, like you were saying to me before the episode, helps to explain why Erica has disowned him, why she's mortified to learn that Michael is going to spend time with Virgil because maybe she's worried that Virgil's doing the same thing to her son that he presumably did to her husband when he was younger.
And why Michael is like nervous about sex stuff with Jill.
Yes. Yeah. So how did you feel about this revelation?
Exact same thing as the Lori stuff, where I'm like, this is important, you guys. This matters. And we're just going to go back to the Kevin Power Hour, I guess. But like, this matters to me.
Right.
And it makes me like wish that the show like embraced its ensemble a little bit more, because these are really good actors doing really good work.
Mm-hmm.
And we just like it becomes the Justin Theroux show more and more and more. But like, there's something here about, you know, familial generational trauma, and also the like way that, you know, especially in Christian churches, that we you know, the prevalence of sexual assault with minors, like all of that stuff is in there. It's cooked into that stew, and then they just leave the stew on the countertop, and they're like, I don't know, someone will get to this, someone will season it later. And it's like, no, that's interesting. And it feels like season 2 of the show has kind of strayed away from being about the disappearance, and it's more about like people existing afterwards. But I think that there even is something in the Virgil stuff about like, we just kind of assumed magic exists, and we don't have the capacity or the bandwidth anymore to handle our grandfather anymore, because there are just bigger problems in our lives, like John going to jail for that. And this, ostensibly, that event like destroyed their family, or like, you know, wrecked their family in a way, and made things much harder between like Evie feeling distanced, and like Michael worrying about his relationship to Faith, and all of that. Like, this is a singular event that like has huge ripples throughout their family. But it just feels like plot wise it is hinted at, and then you just kind of go, okay, yeah, that is probably a thing.
Yeah. It also, I think, probably is going to be used to explain John's contempt for claims of miracles, right? Because if Virgil molested him or harmed him, whatever that means, that's what they're implying, I think. And then Virgil turns around and says, well, I was shot and killed, and now I'm reborn, and I'm not a bad guy anymore. Of course, John is going to be like, fuck that. Fuck anybody who says anything that sounds even remotely like that. There are no miracles in Miracle, and I'm going to like outright refuse to hear or give quarter to anything along those lines. I think that's where the show is going to go with that, which on some level is like a kind of interesting story way to like tie the storylines together. But also, I think what gives me pause about this is it feels like the show is using like a pretty significant traumatic concept to like do plot justification instead of character work. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And that bothers me because, you know, you take a show like Twin Peaks, which we'll talk a lot about in the next episode, that handles similar themes and handles like the lived reality and like the human implications of those themes much more in depth than The Leftovers touches them. And The Leftovers is kind of treating it like a plot twist or something. Mm-hmm. I don't know. So that's what really gave me pause here and made me feel uncertain about how to process it. Because it also just like, I don't know, like we could have justified the Murphy family dynamic in a number of different ways. Like you said, we could have tied it to the sudden departure and had like further explorations of how that event shapes people and their philosophies. I don't know. So I have really mixed feelings about it. And I'm curious to see what the next few episodes do, because maybe they address those things. I don't know. But yeah.
What I'm thinking is more likely is that some of this is even going to get punted to season 3. I didn't even consider it because I figured, season 3 probably takes the whole cast and moves them to another place.
That's what I figured too, yeah.
But like, does that, when you say the whole cast, does that include the Murphys? Do they come with the Garveys, or is it going to be the Garveys leave again? Because I would like the Murphys to come from whatever happens in 9 and 10, but we don't know. We're entering the realm of mystery after this, or after next week. So yeah, there's a lot of this episode just in general is throwing up a lot of questions. Last Murphy's thing before we get to the final like Virgil moment, Kevin goes to John to ask him if he can help him get rid of the handcuff, and learns that at the fire department, which feels weirdly sinister once again, like all these men, and you feel like it's tense before you know why it's tense. They're basically having every man in the town lay their handprint, or cover their hand in black ink and then lay the handprint on paper so that it can be scanned and put through a processor to match against the handprint that was on Evie's car, because they know that somebody touched it. The editing here is brilliant because we get a millisecond shot of Kevin in his haze going into the water, putting his hand on the car. And so in that 1 second, you're like, okay, it's Kevin. There's, in our mind, there's no more question about who it is. So Kevin, for the love of God, do not put your hand on that thing. And he nearly gets away. It seems like he's just going to be fine with it. And John is like, the tension of John's looking for has some guy look for the cutters. The guy can't find them. Kevin's like, all right, I guess I'll go somewhere else. I'll go to the locksmith. And then John is just, one more thing. By the way, Kevin, can you just do it real quick? Can you just place your hand on this? And he does. And you watch the handprints go slowly into that computer. And then
so tense. Oh my gosh.
We're left with a question mark because they know now. And Patti says, you got out, you freed yourself so that you could put yourself back in trouble, basically. Right. You re-imprisoned yourself, which he just doesn't seem to have the capacity to handle right now. But John knows. Yeah. By next episode, John will know. Which, conflict. We love to see it. So, all that being said, what brings us into the next episode is Kevin turns around after all of this crazy stuff and goes to Virgil's house. And sees Michael come out of the house, clearly unhappy about something. And we learn a couple of things from Virgil. We learn that the guy in the watchtower, whose name is Edward, was a previous client of his, in that he also did this death ritual. And sweaty Kevin is debating taking this drink. Basically, Virgil's like, you drink this thing, it's going to stop your heart, and then I'm going to hit you with a big shot of epinephrine, which after less than 5 minutes will wake you up and you'll be fine. So that you'll die and come back to life, because I know you don't want to die, and no one wants to die. Life is precious, he says. Kevin starts arguing with Patti, to which Virgil is immediately like, "Oh, is that her? You guys arguing? You having a little thing?" She says she is telling Kevin it's not a good idea, and he says, "Well, what my father did to finally be freed from the voices in his head was to listen to what they were saying, and you actually were telling me to do this. So, goodbye, Patti." And drinks the drink. Falls unconscious, foams at the mouth, and then the first time I watched it, I vividly remembered this from my first watch. The first time I watched this, it scared the crap out of me that Virgil like releases the epinephrine into the like air and doesn't put it in Kevin, and so Kevin is left there basically to die. And you're like, oh shit, Virgil's a liar. Why did he trick Kevin? But then Virgil also takes his own life and shoots himself, and Michael comes in and seems to know what was going to happen and drags Kevin's body away as the episode plays out to some Duke Ellington. Stressful. I saw reviews of at the time being like, are we going to get an episode without Kevin now?
Oh,
we're going to get a Kevin. You guys, you were so innocent. You wished. You thought. But no, that's not what we get at all from the next one. So let's talk straight notes.
Okay.
You got any?
We get an explanation of the rope and cinder block moment when he first talks to Virgil. Patti concealed the fact that Kevin went to Virgil when he was sleepwalking, and it seems that the episode is telling us that the earthquake happened to prevent Kevin from dying, because Virgil says either you've got somebody looking out for you or you've got yourself a most powerful adversary. So put a pin in that, because I guess we'll get some more thoughts on that in the next couple episodes.
Adversary?
I was not a fan of the repeated use of the phrase "do battle" when Patty's like, "I can't wait to do battle with you." Like, this sounds stupid, guys.
It's
Stop
really
it.
goofy. It's trying to be biblical or something, but it sounds silly.
Even Ann Dowd couldn't sell that phrase.
Do battle.
And she did a great job.
Yeah.
I think that's all I got, though.
Only one I had. I do like the recurring, like all the actors who see Kevin with the handcuff when they ask him what it is, and they're like, "Oh, so was it you or her?"
Yeah, I like John's like, "Hey, my man."
My man.
That's fun.
Kinky. And Kevin gets to be like, yeah. It's definitely not my psychosis manifesting. I have a really kinky wife, and she just likes doing this stuff. That's all.
Yeah.
Also, in the same sense, when the hardware store guy looks at him and declines to do it, and then Kevin goes like, "Can you shut the fuck up?" to a 10-year-old is hilarious. And then the kid's like, "Oh, okay, I was yelled at by an adult." I thought that was all kind of silly. But that's all I got. Let's load up our silenced pistols, hide them in the toilet, and we'll come right back after this brief musical break to discuss International Assassin.
Welcome back to the Chatzovers. The second episode we watched this week was Season 2, Episode 8 of The Leftovers, entitled... What? Entitled? What is this, a Master of Disguise? Kind of, because it's The International Assassin. It was written by Damon Lindelof and Nick Cuse, directed by Craig Zobel. It aired on November 22nd, 2015. Alan, what happened in International Assassin?
I just have to tell you that I tabbed away from my notes because I figured you were about to start over. But the fact that you kept going I'm so impressed.
Do you want a clean take?
No. I love the take that you gave me.
Okay, great.
In this episode, a man named Kevin Harvey wakes up in a mysterious hotel in Texas. He's given a mission by the hotel's concierge, Virgil. He needs to assassinate Patti Levin. But it turns out that the politician Patti Levin is not the Patti that he's looking for. It is instead a young girl who is hand in hand with a man named Neil in the hotel. We also get the sense that people in the hotel are all dead, and that this is a sort of purgatory, a sort of Hotel California in Texas. The episode concludes with a trip to Jordan, Texas, where Kevin, now going by Kevin Garvey for some strange reason, it must be weird, but international assassins change their names all the time, so I guess I get it. Takes the young Patti Levin, the real Patti Levin, to a well in Jordan, Texas, throws her into the well, and then has a heart-to-heart with the adult Patti Levin at the bottom of the well before the world shatters once again, and he wakes up in the real world as Kevin Garvey.
Yeah.
Okay, so, guys, this is considered by many to be the best episode of The Leftovers. This is my favorite episode of The Leftovers. It's also considered one of the best hours of television. There's this sect of people, 2010s TV people, who there'll be those Twitter threads that's what's the best hour of television you've ever seen? And this is always on those lists. My first question, Magellan, is do you feel like it lives up to the hype?
I thought this was an incredible episode of Twin Peaks: The Return.
Ooh, didn't expect you to make that swerve, but I agree.
Which is funny because it came out a couple of years before Twin Peaks: The Return. And yet I finally think I understand this is the water, this is the well, drink full and descend.
Fuck.
I think I get it now. No, I really liked this episode. I didn't have any expectations for it except that it was going to be strange. And I think maybe I spoiled it somehow. I definitely spoiled Kevin dies, comes back to life at some point.
Yeah.
I think I maybe spoiled he goes into a purgatory or dream world or whatever. But I think this is a really well done one of these. There are other shows that do stuff like this, where it's you're in this other dimension or this purgatory thing or this dream space, and it operates on a kind of emotional logic or dream logic. And we're going to have this sort of symbolic exploration of other characters and ourselves. And I think what this episode does a beautiful job of is it essentially tells this story about how ending Kevin's fixation on Patti doesn't mean killing her or vanquishing her. It means understanding her and forgiving her in a way for the things that she did, seeing where those things came from, finding empathy for her, and finding the ways in which this sort of construction of Patti is representative of things within Kevin himself that he has not really been able to process. And so through empathizing with Patti, he's processing those things about himself, and he's himself healing and trying to let some of those things go. So I think it's a really beautiful exploration of that. I think any of my issues with the episode exist kind of on the periphery of the episode with what we said about how it's set up. And certainly with the last moment when he rises from the earth, reborn, and Michael's like, oh shit. The kind of mystical context of this, him literally coming back to life. Maybe you could make the argument like the poison didn't kill him. It just stopped his heart for a while.
Right.
And we could conceivably have a sort of grounded explanation for it. It just doesn't feel plausible to me anymore. Like the show's not going to get less mystical from this point. Exactly. You know what I mean?
Totally.
And that's something that I have misgivings about. So I think in isolation, this episode is an incredible hour of storytelling, and I think it's totally fair for it to be on those lists. It's not my favorite episode of Leftovers. I think it's up there because for me, I think ultimately what makes a great episode of The Leftovers is an episode that directly deals with real characters in real situations, in real context, trying to resolve issues related to the aftermath of the sudden departure, i.e. the Nora Erica episode. Mm-hmm. And this is a really great moment of TV storytelling that is kind of a sudden departure story. It definitely deals with stuff from season 1. Definitely deals with the way that some of Kevin's attachment issues are rooted in the sudden departure, but they're also just him and his attachment issues. So yeah, I don't know. I think decontextualized from the show, it's amazing. Contextualized within the show, it's not the best episode of The Leftovers for The Leftovers, if that makes sense.
I think it does. What it does for me is it feels like a standalone tone piece or a poetry episode, which is why Majon and I like it a lot, and that's why this is my favorite. Is I like episodes of television that feel good for a podcast, that feel like the stuff I talked about in high school English class, or that feel like, okay, this isn't as straightforward as A, then B, then C happened. Because, I just summarized the whole plot of the episode in 30 seconds up top, improvised off the top of my head even. That was not even based on anything. But, every moment is chock full of intentional symbolism and, really rich, useful metaphors for, actually understanding Kevin and understanding why he's been, we're finally in his head. It turns out we answer the question, where is my mind? It's right here. It's in this episode. It's funny that, the episodes that this one gets compared to a lot, obviously there are references to The Godfather in the sort of, international assassin plotline. The coma dream is a pretty common trope, most notably in The Sopranos season 6, and also relevant to Trek Chat's Shades of Grey, the season 2 finale. Which is also a coma dream episode, but is not as well liked because it's a clip show. And this is not a clip show. This is just an entirely original story that is a coma dream in a way, or a unconscious dream. And I love the poetry of it. I love how vague some of the things are, but how much you can pick out of it. And I think it's worth a watch, even if you have been falling off of The Leftovers season 2 and you're like, I don't know what Kevin's got going on. Check out International Assassin. It's also just beautifully directed and very entertaining in itself. You can watch this episode fairly separate from season 2 and get a feel for okay, that character is probably in the show, and that guy, oh, that's Gladys. Okay, yeah, I remember Gladys from season 1. I think it just works. This is a really well constructed piece of television.
Definitely. Now, you were giving me the impression coming into this that you were a little colder on it the second watch than your first. Is that accurate to say?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think... Well, I think my first watch, I was just like, that was weird. I'm never going to understand that. Which is exactly how I interpreted Twin Peaks The Return the first time.
Right.
And I loved that about it. But now it's like, okay, I actually feel like I'm mature enough. And because, as I was saying in part 1, we just watched all of season 1 and then went right into season 2. I, like, get it. It doesn't feel too complicated to me. Like, there's a difference between thematic richness and being complicated. And at the end of the day, International Assassin, I'm like, yeah, that's actually, this is not that weird. People do Coma Dream episodes all the time. And this is basically just Kevin being like, I'm worried about X, Y, and Z, and they are manifesting in my head. I learned to empathize a little bit and like see things and forgive and forget and move forward. And that's how we progress in a post-departure world. That's like what International Assassin is. And so that's kind of why I was like, oh, I'm not like wowed and floored by it because we also just rewatched Twin Peaks. So I'm like, this has been done before. This is no longer, this was so singular for me the first time I saw it. And now I'm like, yeah, this is another one of those great, great Coma Dream episodes. So I think that's where I'm coming from. That like my overall impression was less invigorated and more like, yeah, you did a good one. Holy crap.
I got you.
And I think too, we were talking in part 1 about like the 2% magic thing, and for this episode to go way further into the magic and why that works for us, is they're not trying to split the difference. Like magic is still like characters are experiencing what you might consider magical or supernatural things in this. But those are still real characters. Actual Kevin is experiencing these things, you know? We call him Kevin Harvey and all of that, but at the same time, he is taking all of his lessons from this episode into the rest of the season and the series. And, you know, we see a lot of characters that we haven't thought about. Like, we actually get to meet Neil, which is interesting. You know, we're seeing Neil on the floor outside of his hotel room, and also at the beginning of the episode when the girl is drowning in the pool and he yells at her, his daughter, probably because she, quote, doesn't know how to swim. There's a lot of talk about water in this episode. I think water and fire are like the two most recurring motifs, because Kevin talks about like, or, you know, the concierge who's Virgil is like, oh, don't drink the water, because I think the metaphor is like the water, not the metaphor, but what they're saying is that the water represents losing that humanity, like losing your sense of humanity a little bit, because Kevin is able to kill Patti, the child, after in having some of the water, and Virgil, when Kevin's like, did you drink the water, he's like, I was so thirsty. That's when he kills the bird in the lobby also. Right. So like, it's cool. This is what I'm saying. It's like, this is all like little things you can dig into, little help, like little references. But at the same time, you can even just say surface level. They did a Jason Bourne for like 15 minutes of this episode, and that was kind of sick. That's just fun. Or like a John Wick, if you want to be more contemporary. I think you told me that this was sort of your, you thought this was Justin Theroux's audition tape for James Bond.
For James Bond, yeah.
I think he could do it.
He looks a little too scared all the time, which is kind of fun.
He's got exactly. That's what I want from my James Bond, though. It's like, woo, he's got the little frumpy, the frown. What were some big moments that you really enjoyed?
So the core of the episode is the two scenes between Ann Dowd and Justin Theroux. I don't know if we want to jump straight to those or if we want to talk about, like, there's a world where we can talk about all the events that happen in this. But it's like, I don't really know what to do with that. Like, he meets Virgil in a parking garage and Virgil tells him there's a gun in the toilet. Wayne's here and that's something, you know, like there's stuff that happens.
There's a way to talk about International Assassin that is to go beat by beat and be like, and then this happens and this happens. But like we said, it's a tone piece. Like, stuff is happening in a specific order. Even the editing suggests like, don't worry too much about how the order of things is laid out. Because all of the cuts are not match cuts. If you notice, like every time a scene ends, there is the camera just doesn't reestablish itself anywhere in the new setting. It's just like, okay, the next thing is happening, which gives it this air of like every space is different. Like, this is not a one coherent hotel. It's a sort of like fictitious hotel. And so like, yeah, it doesn't really matter the order that these things happen. Kevin goes on a Dante's Inferno-esque journey through a hotel that
Yes,
represents
which is why his name is Virgil, by the way.
Did you guys get it? Nobody names a character Virgil on the TV show unless it's this.
Yeah. I think what's thematically, I'd like to talk about those two scenes with him and Andowd, and then we can flesh out other stuff around it if we're interested in talking more about those things. Does that sound good to you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because those two scenes, I think, are the thematic core of this episode. Essentially, Kevin's playing the role of this international assassin who's there to assassinate Patti, who's running for president as a guilty remnant candidate, which is like, what a dream, what a stress dream to have. And there's this incredible monologue that Andowd delivers when he has the meet and greet with her in the hotel room, where she talks about, oh, someone's here to assassinate me. What do assassins do? And she gives this, essentially both of these scenes, the one here and the one in the well, outline like, what is Kevin's relationship to Patti? That's the question. Why is he seeing Patti? What does it mean to stop seeing Patti? And here, the double for Patti introduces the hypothesis that when someone is going to assassinate someone else, it's because they share a very strong belief. And like, what's great about this monologue in this scene is that it almost makes sense in that way that things in dreams sometimes do.
Yeah, until you Google anything from it.
And she talks about like, John Wilkes Booth hated slavery. Did you know that? And Wayne's like, I didn't know that. And that's not true.
Not true.
That's just wrong. And so, it's great because it's presenting this scene where we're saying like, okay, Kevin wants to kill Patti because deep down he agrees with her in some way. And we're primed for that because in the scene, one of the prior scenes with Gladys and the lie detector, when she asks Kevin, why do you smoke? He says, I'm addicted to nicotine. The lie detector says, Buzz, no, you're not. And he says, I smoke to remember, which is what the guilty remnant does. So you're like, oh shit. Kevin like agrees with the guilty remnant in some way. Patti says to him in this scene, well, what do you think my goal is, or my project or my thesis? And he says, you want to destroy families. And so in this scene, what it's saying is like, Kevin wants to destroy families.
Exactly.
And that's something that I think is really rich and interesting as a kind of like counter argument or counter interpretation of Kevin. The thing that he's afraid is true about himself, right? Mm-hmm. And
why
I think
Kevin want to destroy families?
Well, I think like a lot of his guilt is grounded in actions that he's taken to undermine the stability of his families. Cheating on his wife. I think his avoidant tendencies, the ways that he hid stuff from Nora, his strained relationship with his daughter, and the conversations he's had with Patti in the season where she's like, well, you wanted to kill yourself. He says, no, I didn't want to do that. I love my family. And she's like, do you really? Like, in a way, this is what Kevin has been asking himself and struggling with throughout the whole season, I think, is like, what does family mean to me? Do I want to have a family? And the place where this connects with the sudden departure is Kevin is someone who has had attachment issues prior to that event, right? Like the Garveys were not at their best, as we know. And he and Patti are characters who are bonded both by the fact that they had these complex relationships with other people and bonded by the fact that their form of distancing themselves or protecting themselves became extra relevant in a post-departure world where suddenly everybody has attachment issues because at any moment anybody could disappear, right? Exactly. And everybody has these sets of doubts about families and about love and feeling safe and things like that. And I thought that I don't know, I just think that this scene is really fascinating for setting up and explaining like what is Kevin's conflict? What is he trying to deny or suppress within himself, even as it's surfacing in the form of Patti? And I think it's a great compliment to the scene with the well later. But yeah, I'm curious what you thought of this scene with Kevin and what turns out to be Patti's double.
From Lowell, Massachusetts.
From Lowell, Massachusetts. Great accent work from Ann Dowd, by the way, switching from the like weird Texas accent to the Massachusetts accent.
Effortless. I don't even know where Ann Dowd's from at this point. I'm just like, you have all the accents across the United States, the highways and byways. I thought it was fantastic. I thought the setup to it was really weird. I didn't like the whole Gladys interrogating Kevin thing. I thought that was like really
contrived. Yeah.
Super contrived, and also just an excuse to have Gladys in here again. I feel like you could have just gotten us to the Patti stuff and had them be there for longer. But yes, once they were there and her talking about we're not so different, you and I mean, you can also read this as like, this is a James Bond movie. This is the villain doing that, like, we're not so different, you and I, but like,
right.
You're still going to die, Mr. Bond. I still have the control, because she's like, Wayne, or someone tells Wayne to shoot Kevin, which doesn't end up happening. So like, there's a lot of layers going on in this conversation, but at the end of the day, what works about this episode overall, and especially this conversation, is it's Patti and Kevin just naked and bare, ostensibly saying, hey, here's my ideology, here's yours, here's where they are at opposition. I need to reassemble my family. You're a person that disassembles families. We can't get along anymore. That was what, at the end of the day, Kevin couldn't do with Patti. That was what his subconscious at least couldn't do. His subconscious did so much of the harm to Patti.
Right.
So I think that stuff all really works. And again, like, Ann Dowd just killing it with the accent work. I thought that was like very funny. I actually like was writing in my notes like, oh, come on, Kevin, don't fall for this. And then he doesn't, because I love the sense that Kevin really comes into his own and understands that he's in like a space where the stakes are different. He doesn't spend the whole time being like, where am I? Is this real? What is real? Am I allowed to do this? He just is like, okay, I can kill people in this. And it's basically what I wrote in my notes is like, International Assassin overall is a story also about what happens when all of the metaphors that we keep talking about, like metaphors that people represent, what does Patti represent? What if those became real, tangible people and things? And the space that Kevin worried about became a hotel. Because then what remains is a sad man in an empty town with an innocent child who didn't do anything. And yet he feels the need to harm her because Kevin is a man that destroys things. That's the violence within Kevin that he worries about. So like, strip away all of the metaphor, and all you're left with is Kevin walking with young Patti to the well and just being like, well, I have to do this. No matter how much people are like, just a heads up, that is a child. That's an innocent child. And it's only in that very last minute that he's like, hey, oh, God, I might be a bad man. I might be a murderer. So yeah, I enjoyed watching them get to Jarden, and also like going back to the water thing. There's so much water in this episode. Kevin waking up from the tub naked, butt ass naked, crawling out. The pool that young Patti almost drowns in. The well being next to the beach, by the way. Like, just there's so much water, and I love that, like the rebirth metaphor and the Christian metaphor there with baptism, and it's all there. It just feels like an episode that I'd say overall every single bit of it was touched by a writer and a director and a team of people who were like, this all has to mean something. So it's just really impressive. But I think also other like big scenes that I enjoyed. The one part I laughed at with the Gladys lie detector was when Kevin said, she's like, why do you smoke, Kevin? And he goes, well, the correct answer ends up being, I smoke to remember, which is like, wait, no, Kevin, you can't be in the guilty remnant. And just, the vibe of it is really good. Wayne being here. I felt really smart because I was like, oh, Wayne's on the toilet because like he was on the toilet when he died. And then he just says it. And I was like,
yeah, right. Right.
It feels like I see, last time I saw you, I was also on the toilet. And it's like, this whole episode works because people don't say the metaphor out loud. Can we not? Right. Can we just not do that? Yeah. But yeah, it's mostly a Kevin and Patti showcase. And I mentioned before I liked the Neil scene. I want to eventually talk about the well, but are there any other like major scenes? Oh, Kevin Sr. comes back briefly, of course.
Yeah, let's talk about Kevin Sr. and then I'd like to talk about that Neil scene a little bit more, I think, and like the role of Neil in this episode.
Kevin Sr. is in the TV. He's trapped in the TV.
Yeah. So this is one of those things where, there are a few things about this episode where you could make the case that it's either a dream or it's mystical. I think one is we're only seeing these characters who are dead, right? Mm-hmm. And you could say, well, Kevin didn't know Virgil was dead and all these dead characters here, so it's mystical. But on the other hand, like, these are all characters for the most part that Kevin knows are dead, so it would make sense for his brain to like lump them together in one group. And I think this scene with his dad is another example. His dad comes in on the TV and it's like, son, I'm in Australia. I'm high on God's tongue and I'm talking to you and you're not an assassin. You're not a fucking assassin. You got to take her to the fucking well. And we can either read this as like literally Kevin's dad is shirtless in Perth in real life and is like psychically linking with his son, or this is just like Kevin's brain putting images together. But either way, his dad's here and sets him on the right path. And they have a nice tender moment where he says, I love you, son. He's like, I love you too, Dad. But I guess we'll see,
I think they're building it to... there's something funny about, like, the connection is bad because the fire is not staying up. Like, that's just all, like, kind of funny in that Twin Peaksy way where you're like, what? This follows some sort of logic. Right. That the connection is attached to fire, but not a real world logic. I think Kevin Sr. stuff is going to get relegated to season 3. I think they're just reminding us that he's in Australia.
Seems like it. Yeah. Also another water thing, like the water puts out the fire. So maybe the fire is like what's in the real world. The water is the dream world. Something.
Sure.
Something's going on there.
That's in there.
But yeah, just fun to see Kevin Sr. because he's a fun guy.
In Japan.
Yeah, so ripped. Oh my gosh. Yeah, so Neil... So tell me about the Neil scene and what you enjoyed about that.
Neil sitting... First of all, I always love scenes of people sitting outside of hotel rooms. That's like a vibe and a half.
Yeah.
I don't feel like I needed to see Neil. I didn't need to meet this guy. Right. Even though I didn't remember this particular scene, I was like, that's probably Neil, isn't it? Yep, it is. It felt predictable in some way. And he's just trying... They kind of attempt to humanize him very briefly. Mm-hmm. Be like, oh, whatever, my life doesn't want me in there, and that sucks. And then he flips very quickly to like, you should have killed that. He says my very nasty word. Yeah, he says the C word about Patti, and that's when Kevin just chokes him out, which is like, I don't want to be too judgmental, but there's just this like recurring trend in television, especially of this era, and of all eras, let's be real, of like the shitty guy is always fat.
Yep.
And there's always some element of like, isn't it gross how he's just like sitting on the floor? Like, they don't like lean hard into it at all, I think, but it's there. They cast him, like it's, and it's just what I want characters that look like Neil to not be the bad guys all the time. And he feels like a bad guy that Kevin is like, I must slay you now. I will kill you. Haha. And like moves on about his mission. I don't know why he killed him other than like, this seems like a bad person.
I think what he's like taking on, that's like the first moment where he's really empathizing with Patti, right? Uh-huh. And he's like, God, this guy is a monster. I want to hurt him. I felt similarly. I mean, speaking of Twin Peaks, like this felt like a real Jacques Renault moment of like, let's make this character as detestable as possible. How are we going to do that? Well, he's like a big drunk guy who says bad words and like talks in a particular way that we find detestable. Mm-hmm. I don't know, just like some shorthand that honestly I don't know. Like what I really like about this episode is where we get to in the well scene.
Oh yeah.
And we get Patty's perspective on what it's like to feel trapped in an abusive relationship. Mm-hmm. And I think that's handled really well. And I think this is something we talked about in Twin Peaks, that like, you don't have to look like this guy and talk like this guy to be someone who's like abusive to their spouse or partner.
Exactly.
And if we just always imagine like cartoonish guys like this, it like serves to conceal the issue to a certain extent. I mean, there are also definitely guys like this who are like that, but I don't know. When I pictured Neil in like previous conversations about him, I pictured him as like extremely neglectful, cold, dismissive,
kind of corporate.
Like kind of corporate, like seemingly to the outside world, just like a typical guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And not this sort of caricature of like, yeah. And maybe it's a thing where this is like Patty's inner child. This is how Patti sees Neil, potentially.
I was going to say it's also how Kevin sees Neil.
Right. So you could make that argument, I suppose. Maybe we're not seeing the real Neil. We're seeing like the inner Neil.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. But even then, why is it this guy who's overweight? I don't know.
I've just been thinking a lot more. One of my Chatzovers is about this, the spoiler alert, about like learning about fat phobia and how we've like perpetuated it in society and in our culture. And the truth is, you just don't get, like I said earlier, you don't get characters like this who aren't evil. You don't get like nice, friendly characters. Not in a show like The Leftovers is, for all my praise for it as being a smart and like sharp show full of like clever ideas. It's also like a bunch of rail thin white people being sad, and like it just is that most 90% of the time until they get to Jarden, right. And then they like add some melanin. But like,
yeah,
it still is just a very like Anglo-centric, thin-centric kind of story that's like about these types of people, and then to include Neil and be like, and by the way, another bad guy also happens to be fat. I'm like, okay, I guess this is fine. This is just how TV is now. Not to say that's across the board, but that was another like tangent that I just thought about when I saw this Neil stuff. Is like, oh, interesting. That was a choice. But he takes care of Neil, and then he finds young Patti, who seems totally okay with hanging out with him. And she's just chatting. I didn't even pick up that young Patti is talking as much as she is because, like, Ghost Patti also does that. Mm-hmm. But at least young Patti has the self-awareness to be like, I talk too much, don't I? Whereas adult Patti is like, I don't care that I talk. I know I do, and I don't care. Mm-hmm. And he realizes that he needs to bring her to Jarden, but on the bridge, he sees a bunch of cars on fire. And then, who's there on the bridge? Just like some guy, an Australian accent man.
Yeah, some guy. I don't know. And he whispers something to Kevin, which is my least favorite thing, is the secret whisper. Yep. I hate that so much.
If that guy is the Australian guy who came back from the dead,
I'm sure it's that guy.
I'm smart. I have a really big brain if that's the case.
I'm sure it's that guy.
Yeah, we don't know any other Australians at this point, right?
Yeah.
I don't know where Dr. Good Child? I always forget that guy's name. I don't know where that guy's from. I think he's British. Anyways, Kevin gets to Jarden with young Patti. He walks her there. And then this heart-to-heart outside of the well, before he just knocks her in. Beautiful lighting. I wanted to like make half of this my desktop background, but then it would just be really weird that like an old man and a child standing by a well is my background. But once they fall in, that's when you get the best part of the episode, I think. The real like emotional meat at the middle of this International Assassin episode, which is Kevin and Patti just in the water, in the well, drinking deep and talking about their problems. This Jeopardy story is amazing. Did you read the trivia about the Jeopardy story?
I did. Yeah, I did.
Can we tell the kids about it?
Uh-huh.
So, this is the part about the Spanish woman in the background. Did you know that, by the way, about the Spanish woman in this is like having her own plot line, and they intended that? The woman who's like...
I didn't notice that, but I read it in the...
I read that first, and then I saw it, and I was like, she says like 2 lines, dude. Why do you guys think so much about this stuff? But that's what making a TV show is like. Hold on. Control F Jeopardy. Jeopardy. Okay. Patti references being on the syndicated game show Jeopardy. Lindelof said the writers made this choice in part due to the fact that Jeopardy contestants phrase their answers in the form of a question, just as The Leftovers is more interested in questions than answers. That's fine. I get it. A little corny.
I laughed out loud, but that's cool.
The final Jeopardy answer that she references comes from the October 14th, 2013 show, which would be the 2-year anniversary of the departure, and a year before the pilot. Of course, this is inconsistent with Neil having already been kicked out of her house. Regardless, there was no contestant named Stuart on that day. Contestant Chris correctly guessed the question, what is Kazakhstan? While contestant Lauren guessed the Ukraine, as Patti says Stewart's did. The previous day's champion Greg incorrectly spelled the country. Although there was no Stewart on 10/14/2013, there was a Stewart who began on the following day, who was, as Patti said, reigning champion for 4 days. And Kazakhstan was the question for Final Jeopardy on the Wednesday before International Assassin aired. And again, a contestant incorrectly said Ukraine, as the answer was like, what is the most what country with the most like connected countries that's not like surrounded by water or something?
The largest former Soviet republic that does not doesn't border an ocean.
Did you read that?
And I also thought Ukraine, and then I remembered that Ukraine has like port cities.
Yeah, exactly.
So I didn't know the answer.
Basically, TLDR, there is a couple of connections to the actual Jeopardy that would have been happening around that time, but not too many. I'm sure somebody did a little bit of research. But yeah, she just like opens up to Kevin, and they have a little moment here. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, it's an incredible monologue, because when the well scene starts, I'm like, oh god, this well scene is gonna fuck me up. And then Patty's like, you ever seen Jeopardy? And I was like, okay, phew, I'm gonna be
super
good.
chill.
And then she proceeds to like deconstruct my entire soul brick by brick with this Jeopardy story.
Yeah.
About, because essentially the story is she got on Jeopardy to win enough money that she could leave Neil. And then she does win enough money, and then she doesn't leave him. And I just got chills saying that. And it's this exploration ultimately of like, you know, what is it that keeps us in situations like this? What are the blockers or the fears that hold us back from the lives that we want to live? And what does it mean for Kevin to be coming face to face with this, to empathize with that, and ultimately to help Patti kill herself, right? Like that's what he's doing here. He's not here to kill himself. He's here to help her kill herself. And how do we feel about that? And I don't have strong feelings about it necessarily, strong conclusions about it. I have very strong feelings. It was an incredibly moving scene and haunted me in, like, when I turned this episode off, I felt a very similar feeling to when I turned off the last episode of Twin Peaks: The Return, which is a bleaker episode than this. I think this is ultimately like has a hopeful bend to it.
Yeah.
But it's just one of those episodes where you're like, fuck, that was so raw and real. And I mean, Ann Dowd just like completely destroyed this monologue and destroyed me in the process. It was gutting and beautiful.
This like cohort, Lindelof, Somerville and company, they really understand the power of two people sitting in the dark and talking, and how like the most important conversations of your life can often happen there, whether it's you reveal something about yourself that's really important, or you are just emotionally vulnerable that in a time that you're not usually able to be, or just a combination of words. Like it's a sight to behold, and it's in an episode that's like full of references to cinema and violence and gore and like, you know, high intensity action. But at the end of the day, it's two people in a well talking, and that's what works about it so well. That's why this is a well regarded episode of television.
Oh well, good job.
Oof.
Good work.
Thanks, man.
Well.
Yeah, what are some other big things though? Well, Kevin finally does it. He drowns her here, and he wakes up, and then Michael is like, "Oh God," which suggests to me that like time passed, maybe, or just like this guy was dead and he's alive.
Enough time for Michael to bury him, right?
Yeah.
It seems like it's probably the same night, I would guess. Sense. Although it could be 3 days later, like the Sparrow thing. Who knows?
Oh my God.
That's my guess. I don't know.
Oh my. Well, because if it's either way, I'm wondering how mad John is. If John's been like, I'm gonna kill that guy, and then he wakes up and he gets out there, he looks for Kevin, and they're like, yeah, Kevin's dead.
I bet you it's been 3 days. That's my guess.
And oh my god, you just blew my mind. And John's like, wow, Kevin's dead, and then he's not. Talk about shaking John's faith and not believing in magic and not believing in disappearances.
Yeah.
And what I know about episodes 9 and 10. Oh my god, so many things are going to happen in the next 2 episodes. Oh god. I thought we were done.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Oh, I've been close.
Yeah.
I think that's the main stuff that I have here.
Yeah, I think the only other thing I was walking away, there's some like little things I want to talk about from throughout the episode. But thematically, the other thing I was walking away with was just thinking back to that first episode where the first episode of the show, the pilot, where Tom is in the car with the guy who's going to go see Holy Wayne, and Tom essentially lays out that there are 2 types of people in the world, those who feel burdened and those who feel abandoned, right?
Yeah.
And it feels like it belongs here with this episode too, because ultimately that theme is exploring, the things that make it hard for us to connect to other people. And I think Patti and Kevin are both characters who, in different ways, with different levels of intensity, different manifestations of this, deeply struggle with forming connections with other people. And, the purpose of this journey for Kevin, I think, is to help him to start connecting to other people, which is an incredibly difficult thing to do. So I'm interested to see the ramifications of that. And I think it's good to keep in mind for ourselves that thesis statement from the pilot of the show, which is like, the people of this world feel burdened, they feel abandoned, they're struggling to connect. And what do we do about that?
That's what I need the 3rd season to be about really badly, for this show to finally stick the landing. Is like, okay, we've found all the differences between all these different groups and cultures and how they've reacted to the departure differently. How do we reconcile and move forward? And that's
right.
Like, if the show can do that, then this show remains in my top 5 of all time. Because right now they're setting up like, man, it is really hard to connect to others and to find this community and kinship with others.
Yeah.
Like, do the work.
Yeah.
So, International Assassin, you should watch it, even if you haven't been watching The Leftovers with us. It's awesome.
There's 2 things I wanted to talk about left in my notes. 3 things. The first is, we got to ding the Leftovers on this bit of racism. When they're reading about the well, there's this whole thing about how it's like a Native American well, and it has spiritual powers, and it's like, fucking
not very cash money.
Guys, you can't do that. Why are you doing that?
Especially because it's not even relevant. It's not even relevant. They just didn't
completely
said it.
Irrelevant. Yeah, right.
You guys said it to say it, basically.
Yeah, that was upsetting. So, Matt, bad point. Sorry, don't do that. Neil says something interesting when Kevin says, hey, I'm an international assassin. Neil says, no wife, no kids, no responsibility. I can see why you picked it. Which I think furthers this theme of like, Kevin is Kevin Garvey garbing himself in this outfit that is not actually true to him. This like desire or impulse he has to lash out, to kill, to isolate himself. That's like sort of the thing that he puts on that is not genuinely himself. And this is an interesting like mirror moment where he sees reflected in Neil a road that he doesn't want to go down. Like, he doesn't actually want that to be true about himself. He doesn't actually want a life, no wife, no kids, no responsibility. But he feels this impulse to choose that. Exactly. And he's trying to deconstruct that and work through it, which I think is that's a well-written moment. Well. And then a moment that's not as well-written is when the security guy is patting Kevin down and says, congratulations, because he has a very big penis. And in the trivia on the Leftovers wiki, I learned that's because Justin Theroux has a very big penis. And there were pictures of him in sweatpants and his big penis, which he was like embarrassed by. And, you know, it feels bad that he was embarrassed by that and that he was like, I don't know, ogled at for that.
Objectified. So yes, that's true.
He was objectified for that. That's not great. So it's kind of funny that they wrote it into the show and addressed it, but you know,
this is the episode to do that.
Weird.
This is also the episode
Right.
where did you mention? I don't know if you mentioned this. The guard that's like, "Oh, you got a cut? Did you put Neosporin on it?"
Yeah, same card. Yeah, same guy.
Yeah. Love him.
Yeah.
That makes him overall one of the best side characters.
Yeah.
Neosporin, big dick man.
Yeah.
What a thing.
Anyway, that's what I got on this one.
I might have misread a sign at one point, but when Kevin finishes the call with his father, he leaves and hears the fire. The fire alarm keeps going off over and over and over again here.
Mm-hmm.
And it says on the sign, "In case of fire, do not use elevators or stairs." I was like, do you? At first, I was like, "That's funny. You can't do anything then." And then I was like, "Oh, is it telling you to jump? Oh, that's intense." That was my main little detail that I thought was interesting. And then he's got the Epictetus quote on his closet door when he dresses himself at the top of the episode. That's like 6th grade English class. Like, how are you going to dress yourself? What is the actual? Do you remember what the quote is?
Know first who you are and then adorn yourself accordingly.
Right. So it's basically Kevin making his GTA Online character and being like, what job am I going to have? Do I want to be a rabbi? And he like puts the outfit on and goes like, wow, not a rabbi. Do I want to be
a policeman?
A policeman. Wee, I'm a cop. No thanks. That's what I do in real world. Do I want to be James Bond? Ba-na-da-na. I also wrote in my notes, every time somebody says international assassin in this episode, I really wanted the scene to pause and then go da-na-da-na. Just every single time for the cool kids out there. That's it. And then I liked the fight scene at the top where the guy's like, "Are you Mr. Harvey?" He's like, "It's Garvey," and he goes, "No, it's Harvey." I wanted him to be Mr. Harvey for the whole episode. That's all I got.
Nice. What's happening next time? I gotta
Nothing.
know. Okay.
No, nothing's happening. Next week on the Chatzovers, we are watching the final 2 episodes of season 2 of The Leftovers, and the final 2 episodes that I have seen. They are season 2, episode 9, 1013. 1013. Interesting. Meg suffers a personal loss and heads out on a pilgrimage to Miracle. After a fallout with Lori, Tom seeks to reunite with Meg.
Oh no.
Odds on them handling that well. That's right, it's 0-0. Wait, that's actually really good odds. It's 8 million to 1.
Okay. Yeesh.
Then the season 2 finale, I Live Here Now. The tensions between Kevin and John reach a climax as the 4th anniversary of the departure brings an unsettling threat to Miracle. I want another earthquake. I want to go. I want higher and higher stakes, and then they have to move to Australia. That's what's gonna happen. Anyways, that's what we have next week. Magellan, plug your stuff.
You can hear me on another podcast called Super Smash Echoes. It's a monthly video game book club type thing where we play games, myself and my friend Justin, that are related to the Super Smash Brothers franchise in some way. And next month we're going to be playing F-Zero GX in honor of Captain Falcon, which is going to be very exciting. So check us out. Check out our backlog of episodes, Super Smash Echoes. Alan, what about you? Where can we hear you elsewhere?
My main other podcast is The Hunter's Quorum, which is a Monster Hunter podcast I do with my friends Six and Banofsky, a.k.a. Casey. We talk about monsters from the Monster Hunter video game franchise and tell you whether or not they are sick as hell or kind of mid. That can be found wherever you listen to podcasts. It's called The Hunter's Quorum. I can do the plug zone this time if you don't mind.
Please do.
Okay. If you would like to send us a question, comment, email, anything, our email address is chatspod@gmail.com. That's chatzpod@gmail.com. And if you send us a message and you are okay with it, we will read it on the podcast. Our Twitter is @chatspod. You can find updates about the show over there. And our community-run subreddit is r/chatspod if you're on Reddit. If you like the show, please consider supporting us in a couple of different ways. We're on all the different platforms, so Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc. Please consider rating us on those if you like the show. That helps the algorithm find us. If you like our work and would like to support us financially and help us keep doing chats, that's Patreon, patreon.com/chatspod. We have all sorts of bonus content at $1 and $3 a month. You get bonus stuff like Magellan watching the X-Files, us talking over movies like Holes and Green Room in the same week because we're chaotic, and us piloting shows. And also just vibing if you like hearing Magellan and I talk about whatever the hell that's not TV related. And then if you support us at $5 a month, you get all of those things and the backlog and a thank you at the end of this podcast every week. So thank you to Arthur, Jen, Kat, Lee, Magellan's mom, Marcus, Marin, Michael, Nick and Pat of the Brothers at Infinite War, Fendon, Six, and Stefan. Thank you all so much for being $5 or above patrons to Chatspod. Patreon.com/Chatspod once again. Chatspod.com is the website where you can find all of our work. Camillastrator is the artist who did our podcast art at Camillastrator on all the social media platforms. And that's just about it, folks. But wait! We got one more little segment. It's called Chatsums Munch. This is a little mini segment where Magellan and I and whoever else is on the show recommend you something to enjoy between now and the next episode of Chats. Magellan, what is or are your Chatsums for this week?
So last week I went to Florida with my family, and we went to Disney World. We went to Universal Studios. We saw some Harry Potter stuff. We saw some Mickey Mouse, all that. But the very best area of a park that I went to was, this is my Chatsum, at Universal Islands of Adventure. There was a Dr. Seuss area, and that was really the tip top. So my Chatsum is to go to the Dr. Seuss section of Universal Islands of Adventure at around 8:30 to 9 p.m. after it's like rained significantly, and go with your brother onto the Cat in the Hat ride when there's a 5-minute wait, and just kind of vibe out in there, and then get some ice cream after. Maybe go on the carousel, which I didn't get to do because my mom didn't want to. She was really tired. Fair, we'd been walking all day. This isn't a call-out post for my mom, who's a very loyal supporter of the Patreon, and I love her very much. Just the fact that I didn't go on the carousel. But the Cat in the Hat ride was great, and the whole vibe of the area was really top-notch. So that's my Chatsum.
Amazing.
Alan, what about you?
I have 2 new Chatsums and then a re-Chatsum that's part of the combo.
Oh.
So 2 podcasts that I can safely say have changed my life. Big, right? One of them I've already talked about. That's Gender Reveal. I want to re-recommend that podcast. It continues to be fantastic. Tuck Woodstock is doing some of the best interviews on the damn podcast sphere. Is an inspiration to me and to many other people. I've been sending their episodes to people recently because they're talking to disability advocates. They're talking to drag performers. They're talking to wrestlers. They're talking to all sorts of cool queer people from around the spectrum of life. And I love that podcast so much. It's made me learn a lot about myself. And speaking of learning, a friend recommended me the podcast Maintenance Phase. John, are you familiar with Maintenance Phase?
I'm not.
It's a delightful little show. Maintenance Phase is hosted by 2 folks who break down the diet and wellness industries. Specifically things like how we measure calories and how that's all kind of bullcrap, and how we where internalized fat phobia came from historically. And it's a great podcast to add to your arsenal if you want to feel like you're really well researched and you know about things that the rest of society is just kind of taking for granted. And how like policy is even being affected by some bunk science out there. So Maintenance Phase will definitely expand your brain and make you think about stuff like that a lot. Check it out. And then finally, I've been spending so much of my free time lately reading because I got a hammock recently. And so I'm half Chatsuming getting a hammock if you can afford one. And I'm also Chatsuming the book Crying in H Mart, which is Michelle Zauner's memoir. Michelle Zauner, also known as Japanese Breakfast. musician, writer, fashion icon, etc. It's a really not heartwarming. I wouldn't call that heart wrenching in a way. Story. It primarily concerns her time with her mother, who died from cancer in 2014, and kind of like growing up with a mother who meant a lot to her and like helped her a lot with so much of her life, and their relationship to food in particular. And that's where the title of the book comes from. Is ever since her mom died, she goes to H Mart and finds herself crying because it reminds her of her mom and how they used to love cooking together. It's really great, and it's beautiful, and it's going to get made into a movie soon, and it's just a very, very good memoir. It's like one of the biggest bestsellers of the last couple of years, so you probably read it, but if you haven't, Crying in H Mart, it's good. That's all I got, folks. I'm going to put away the silenced pistol, and I'm going to say thank you so very much for listening, and thank you to Magellan for being the... I wish I actually remembered her name when she says she's from Lowell, Massachusetts. I wish I would have called you that. No, instead I'll call you the bird to my Virgil, because I have to squish you to to pass on in the world. Can I do one more? Can I do one more? This episode's full of them. You're the big European guy who brings flowers to my hotel room, and then we get in a fist fight. To my Kevin Garvey.
I like that.
You're the You're the Alex Trebek to my Patti Levin.
Whoa.
Pretty good, right? She doesn't even name drop Alex, but he's technically
pretty
there.
Soon I'll be the Ken Jennings and Mayim Bialik to your Patti Levin.
Aren't they currently doing it? But that's gonna become permanent soon?
Yeah, they said they were the permanent host.
Gotcha. That to my that. Thank you for listening to the Chatzovers, where pushing someone into a well can sometimes lead to learning about yourself. Peace.
Bye.